wanted to go back into the system, learn the language of doctors, so that I could have these conversations and work in the system while changing it.
I'm Dr. Louise Messara. Welcome to Season 4 of the Future Health podcast, Future Proof, a podcast about the future ways we will work, the work we will do, and the impact of technology and scientific innovation on the future of the healthcare industry. We have a fantastic lineup of guests this season as we cover topics ranging from life-saving cars to robot lawyers and even diagnostic t-shirts. So go ahead and like, share, or subscribe now so you don't miss a thing. Robots, artificial intelligence, autonomous technology. These are powerful buzzwords that are dominating the innovation landscape and have many in the health system asking the question, will doctors eventually be replaced by technology? For many generations, the answer to this question was an obvious no. But already computers can process far more information than the average human, and Da Vinci offers precision beyond the limits of the human hand. So if computers have it over humans in terms of theoretical medical knowledge and intricate procedures, how essential is humanness to the role of doctor? It kind of begs the question, what will it mean to be a doctor in 20 or 30 years? What role will patients want for their doctors, and what care will they accept from a robot? What new or different skills will we expect doctors to have? What type of people should we be encouraging into medicine? The practice of medicine is often referred to as an art rather than a science. Is it going to be the art of medicine that will protect the doctor from extinction? Today, we're going to talk to Dr. Ben Bravery, a zoologist who made the decision to train as a doctor after his own experience with the health system as a patient. We're going to challenge Ben to talk about what he wants for the future of his profession, from his perspective as both a passionate junior doctor and a passionate patient advocate. I'm Dr. Louise Messara, and this is Future Proof. Dr. Ben Bravery is a scientist, then a patient, and more recently a doctor and published author of the book The Patient Doctor. Ben volunteers, advocates, writes and speaks about his experiences as a patient, as well as the medical profession and medical education, and his commitment to advocate for change in Australia's health system. Welcome to Future Proof, Ben.
Thank you.
So you're currently a junior medical officer for New South Wales Health, but you're here as both a doctor and a patient advocate. For those that don't know, we better give the listeners a bit of a brief history. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to being here with us today?
Totally. How far back are we going?
Oh, look, the day you were born. I always like to start with the day people were born.
Well, the book starts there, but I won't start there today because we don't have time. I guess in a nutshell, I got a major illness in my 20s, and at the time I was living in Beijing. I was a zoologist, so quite different to medicine. And
Is it?
Well, yeah actually,
okay.
we may get to there. We may get to why it's not. And then I was building the science communication business. It was post-Olympics, so it was kind of an amazing time to be in Beijing. I had just met the love of my life, and I could no longer ignore the symptoms that had been occurring for about 6 months. And now, having been trained, I know they're classic bowel cancer symptoms. At the time I Googled it though and diagnosed myself with hemorrhoids. So I spent some time explaining away those symptoms until I couldn't, and then I would faint, get night sweats, lose weight, got pale, and I had to kind of put it all on the table, and I did that with my mum, who convinced me to get a colonoscopy. Go mum. So I flew back to Melbourne, got a colonoscopy, and they found a whopping great big lesion in the sigmoid. And then very quickly, I entered the cancer treatment machine. That lasted about 18 months. So I had radiation, chemotherapy, a couple of surgeries, had a few complications, a couple of infections, an anastomosis leak. I got bilateral pulmonary emboli. At the end of it, I tried to go back to my world as I knew it, but something had changed. And it took me a little while to work that out. I ended up taking a whole year off and doing nothing except thinking and cooking. And I decided that I needed to go back into healthcare. I needed to face the fear and give back to the system that had saved me, because along the way, a few aspects of the care I thought could have been improved. The technical care was outstanding, right? And I'm alive because of it. I'm very grateful. It was in the public system. I didn't pay a cent. But the humanity at a couple of those key treatment points was lacking. And I really felt that as a patient. I wanted to go back into the system, learn the language of doctors, so that I could have these conversations and work in the system while changing it.
So you formed a pretty clear picture, I think, of the qualities of what you believe are a good doctor. We've got this interesting way of recruiting doctors I suppose it's not interesting, it's just the way we've always done it, which is, do well at school, get really high marks and decide that's what you're going to do and off you go. There's very few pathways which involve much more than just your academic qualifications. Do you think we're finding is that the right way to bring people into a medical profession? Are we going to be identifying the right sort of values and attributes that way?
I'm so glad you asked this, and I've got a very controversial answer, which is that we aren't doing it the right way. And this is a hard thing to talk about, though, because there are people working in health that deserve to be there, and I'm not criticising their career choices and what drives them, but there's a lot of people not working in health who also deserve to be there. And I think the part of the problem is that the way we select people doesn't necessarily reflect the job. It reflects an academic temperament, an academic aptitude, but not the job. And if you ask patients what matters, yes, they're going to value the technical excellence, which I think nearly anyone can learn, but they're going to talk so much more about the body language and the way a question was answered and how a loved one felt validated and how approachable a doctor was and whether they were consulted properly and made a informed decision about treatment. The human side of this is not something that's selected for. We tend to choose middle-class people with professional families, with private health insurance from fancy postcodes who have done well at a particular type of test, which is far removed from what the final job involves. I would love to see a broadening of who we let into medical school. I'm not saying we drop the standard. I'm just saying we alter the standard to really value the things that I think we need in healthcare and that patients demand.
I think we're going to get on to a little bit about what that might look like. But if we move from sort of recruitment into the medical profession, into the education that is currently being delivered, you've been in medical school more recently than me. Certainly my experience was, very much to the side of the patient. We were doing a lot of lectures, book learning. In the last couple of years there was more, but I think we did ethics in 1 week, for example.
Yep.
I'm just keen to hear, have we improved, and are we teaching the right things in medical school now? And if not, what are the areas that you think we need to be changing from a medical school curriculum?
So this is probably the single most important question, because if you select a cohort for a particular skill and then you just reinforce that skill over and over again without adding in all this other stuff, you're at risk of pumping out clinicians that aren't fit for purpose. They're not fit for the patient-doctor relationship. Some schools do it better than others. So some will run workshops on empathy and communication. Some will have leadership. Some build it in through research. Some do some interprofessional teaching and communication, but it's not robust. And it's not given the status that the pathology and the biochemistry and the anatomy is. It's not, there are no prizes for this stuff like there is for the core subjects. And it's seen as a soft skill. It's seen as an add-on. I would really like to see it more centrally related to the curriculum, but the problem that schools have is that probably for the last 70 years, they've just added to the curriculum. They haven't rationalised what we're teaching doctors. We're using an old model where we're the gatekeepers of information. So if you just load the brain with information, you'll get a good doctor. I don't think we're setting people up for the kind of, the world that people come to in healthcare now when they get sick, the Web 2.0 world, the world where they're used to equalising power and shared decision-making. We say this stuff in health, but we're not really teaching our clinicians that way. We're teaching them that they know everything and that their job is just to spew that out.
Okay. So how long have you been a doctor now?
5 years.
You we mentioned just before we started recording, there was some reference to small people. Is there a baby on the way? Or?
No, I've got a toddler.
Oh, you've got a toddler already.
He's two and a half. He's 2.5.
Do you imagine sort of dreaming that one day your toddler will become a doctor? Is it something you think is a good profession for other people to be part of?
So they're two different questions.
Okay.
He can do whatever he likes.
Yeah.
Do I think it's an excellent career? Yes. Am I fulfilled? Yes. But I meet a lot of people that aren't. And I watched my colleagues go through medical school, and then a lot of us now are advanced trainees approaching fellowship. I watch the change in them. I see the fire go. I see cynicism and ego replace it. And that worries me. And I think I was doing a talk recently, and a PGY5 came up to me and said that she'd left clinical medicine and got a job with pharma, and she asked me how I stayed in the game. And when I was talking to her, it turned out that she'd gone to medical school because that was what was expected of her. Her parents had recommended medical school, they'd wanted her to go, they'd been coaching her for the exams, and she went on autopilot. So I chose to go, and I chose from a very deep place. You know, it's in my DNA, my treatment. I learnt medicine as someone who had been sick, not the other way around. I don't think that everybody needs to do that to be a great doctor. I just think they have to tap into what their purpose is. And if we think more about how we're selecting and training people, we will cultivate that purpose. You don't necessarily have to have it at 18 or 19, but you have to at least be thinking about it, because that's going to sustain your career down the track. And a lot of the data at the moment, you'll know more about this than me, suggests that a lot of people are considering leaving. Certainly the latest medical training survey of 23,000 junior doctors across the country suggested 1 in 5 have contemplated leaving, which is extraordinary, because this used to be a career that you entered and stayed in for life. It's not that anymore.
You mentioned the sort of cynicism, the building cynicism in some of your colleagues, and watching the sort of fire go out. The hospital environment, it still is very much a sort of an apprenticeship model. You're watching those ahead of you. You're finding inspiration in the people that you're seeing, or sometimes not. When you think about where we need to start this change, so if we're, granted we need to, there's a whole way of which we could talk to very young people at school about what the career of medicine actually is or could be, and we could be in enhancing that passion in a different sort of people, different sort of group of people.
Totally.
And we could be changing the way we do medical education. But role modelling is so important, and in healthcare, it's sort of hard to envisage how we change the world of junior doctors when surrounding them are senior doctors who've done it a very certain way and you hear all the time, my day, you should have to work for 47 days straight because I did. So if we're going to start to make these transformative changes for the medical profession, do we start with senior doctors? Do we start with junior doctors? Can we start with junior doctors without involving senior doctors? How do you see that sort of playing out?
I think organisationally it wouldn't make sense to target any isolated group, because that's not how you get broader cultural change. It would need to be multi-pronged, and you'd need to be thinking about the levers within the system. I think it would make sense to start with both, but they're going to need very different messaging, and they're going to need very different systems around them to foster those skills. And then we end up in an uncomfortable conversation about power and the fact that a lot of senior doctors hold a lot of it. And I think equalising some of that power and restoring some of it further down the chain is needed. But that's a tricky conversation. That's a tricky thing to navigate. We could start by incentivising the things that we're talking about today, the kinds of things that we know patients over and over again value and complain about, right? We incentivise that. We tie it to professional advancement, to performance reviews. We get a bit more corporate about how we manage people within the health sector. It shouldn't be a set and forget model. People should be accountable for their behaviour. I think health has been largely immune from the kind of changes that have occurred in other sectors of society, partly because it's a complicated, important business, but partly because there's a lot of entrenched power that has resisted change. The juniors coming through are different. They are different. And eventually they will sweep through and fill up the hierarchy, and there will be small changes from that. But we risk, I was talking to my GP about this the other day, he called it bastardization. We risk them being bastardized in some way, to being, corrupted in some way. And so I think, we could just wait for the generations to change and filter through. But that's a waste, because every patient encounter every day is an opportunity to do better. And we would be wasting time and unnecessarily harming patients along the way if we didn't act now.
You've mentioned, I've seen you talk a few times, and you've talked a little bit about the desire to be seen as a person, both as a doctor and as a patient. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that, what that experience is?
That's the thing that struck me, the thing that made me want to write the book was a lot of my feelings as a patient were identical to my feelings as a medical student and then as a junior doctor. This cog in the machine, this powerlessness, lack of autonomy, some dehumanization to some extent. As a patient, it's losing your clothing and your belongings, having an ID badge, getting put in an anonymous ward, having no privacy, not being able to control your environment, having strangers come and talk to you all day long, most of whom you don't know. As a medical student, it was the competition, the ability for a senior or an educator to want to humiliate or bully or intimidate. As a junior, it's that I literally am a cog in the HR machine. The hospital doesn't see me as a registrar. They see me as a line in an Excel spreadsheet. That's how a lot of my colleagues feel. It's up to us to cover our own leave. It's up to us to have to negotiate our time off, our sick leave, our fax leave with each other, because there's no redundancy in the system, because we aren't seen as people with needs. We're seen as lines in a spreadsheet. I think the more that we acknowledge the whole person, and I wanted doctors and patients to better understand that about each other, but really it was a call to arms to the system. The system appears to have been designed for lines in a spreadsheet, both as patients in an EMR and doctors in a HR database. It's not built for people, not complex people with feelings and competing interests.
You referenced a bit earlier that, obviously you're very grateful for the technology and the knowledge that meant that you're here with us today and you're healthy and well, and I was going to say very tall, but I don't think that was down to that. When I start thinking a little bit about what it will be to be a doctor over the next 10, 20, 30 years, there's a lot to be said for whether the knowledge bank is going to be the really necessary part of what it is that we do as doctors. In other professions already, that sort of junior rung of the career ladder is sort of being taken over by intelligence in computer form. I think there's good and bad about technology coming into healthcare, and I'm really interested in what you think about maybe some of the changes that it will create, good changes, space in your day, in your time, when some of those sort of very repetitive or knowledge-only based tasks, like when you can look up on a computer in 5 seconds, maybe you don't have to have memorized quite so much information. When there are programs that are going to help us with the clinical decision-making pathway, and we get to a point where we trust that information, what does that do for us as doctors? Where does it make, what parts of what we do are going to rise to the surface as being the thing we're known for, if it's not the encyclopedic knowledge of bacteria and viruses? Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
I don't know, do you think what patients will want from doctors is going to change? Will, as the information asymmetry disappears, and you were using Google Doctor, and we won't recommend that, but...
well, I do recommend it.
You do recommend it. Well, it's a good point. You do recommend it.
I do recommend it, but because it's the start of a conversation, and I think this answers your question.
Okay.
I don't think what patients want from doctors has ever changed. I think it's the same as it was a millennia ago. It is about this. right? It's two people sitting down, one hearing the other one's ailments and coming up with a solution. Now, the solution might be very, very technical, and there will always be a role for really technical stuff in medicine. Some of the interventional stuff is mind-blowing. I'm still in awe of surgeons. There will always be a need for that, but that still is a people game. It's a surgeon interacting with colleagues and navigating a system inhabited by people. Every aspect of the doctor-patient relationship is grounded in humanity. What I worry about is that the technology will be seen as a substitute for some of the patient-doctor interaction rather than facilitating doctor-patient interaction. I mean, you can bet that patients are chat GPTing the hell out of their stuff already. You can bet that they're putting in, actually someone did this the other day in one of my WhatsApp groups, they asked chat GPT to interpret its MRI.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they fed the report in and said, "Can you summarize this in lay language for me?" And so the information brokering part of our job is at risk. What we need to do is assess. It's going to come down to history, right? It always comes down to history. It's 80% of doctoring. It always will be. What does the person in front of me need? What do they value? How is this information going to fit into their understanding of their body and illness? And how are we going to design treatments that they'll actually want to do and that they'll take?
So if we think about giving the computer maybe the opportunity to tell us what let's take cancer. Many treatment protocols, and using an algorithm, a computer might come up with a treatment protocol that, based on 1 million inputs, has the best chance of success. But as a doctor sitting across from you, I'm going to understand what your emotional aptitude for that type of intensity of treatment might be, the other things that are going on in your life, which mean you may or may not be able to be compliant with a particular type of regime. So it's that you're talking about the sort of computer plus human equals best outcome for patient, or am I?
No, I think you're right. We definitely, of course, we need as much tech as we can get our hands on, because the body is very complex and disease is getting extremely precise and individualized. And its treatments are. I think technology's got a huge role to play there. But a bit like when EMRs came in, patients noted that the attention shifted, right? It shifted to the interface.
Yeah.
And I saw an interesting study recently that said patients would rather a human doctor that made some mistakes than a perfect AI bot.
So I read the same thing, I think, because it was like, I was going to ask you the question, how do does it surprise you that humans, the patients, would want a less accurate human than a more accurate machine to give them or to tell them the diagnosis? Because I struggle with that a little bit.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, because at the end of the day, so many of these questions are life and death questions. I'm interested. Delivery, but accuracy, I'm into accuracy as well. So I think it's an interesting time, and I wonder whether over time, when the younger generations are coming through are so tech native, that whether that skepticism or that need for humanness will change. It sounds like you think it won't.
No, I don't think it will.
Yeah.
I think because you remember, it's not like sitting on your couch scrolling through Instagram while watching Netflix. It's someone worried about something inside them.
Yeah.
That's not a default state. That's a state of vulnerability. It will always be a state of vulnerability, no matter how much technology someone has Googled or accessed or sourced before that consultation.
Yeah.
They will go to that consultation vulnerable. They will go to that consultation fearing the worst and hoping for the best. And that, at the moment, cannot be coded by a machine. And as you rightly point out, people don't want that from a machine, because that's not who we are. We must remember that we're Homo sapiens sapien, right? We're animals, and we've spent time evolving around each other, particularly at our most vulnerable. That's when we lean on each other. We're social beings. We'll always be social beings. And I think all the data over the last 20, 30 years to do with computers and social media shows that it's not the solution to increasing sociality. It's actually the enemy. And it's great that we're having this chat, because I saw yesterday the head of Google's AI program resigned.
Yes, very dangerous, that AI.
He's terrified. He's terrified what it will do. And I think if he's terrified, the rest of us should be at least worried.
So taking all that on board, there still will be changes to what it is to be a doctor. I think. That's just inevitable, and it's coming, and probably for many career groups. And I think what it was, the World Economic Forum said 65% of children entering primary school today will work in completely in new jobs that don't even exist today. It feels like it's a leap to say medicine is going to be one of those new jobs, but is there a vision where it is? So what it is to be a doctor, the sort of people that want to become a doctor, what they think of when they think of, that's the life I want, that's the career I want. Can you see a future where it is so different from what we have today?
I think it's hard, right? Like, I'm not a futurist. You know more about this than me. If we get romantic for a second, I think it will continue because it has always been there. It has, if you think about it, it has already withstood enormous technological change since we gathered around in circles and ground up leaves that we thought had medicinal properties, to the Industrial Revolution, to the information age. It has evolved, but at the core of it, it will always be an exchange of feelings and ideas between two people, one of whom is at their most vulnerable. I can't see that changing. I can see it taking place in different settings. I can see people being armed with different resources on both sides of the patient-doctor relationship. But I think, there are great self-management apps, and we've got, menstrual products that track cycles, and we can put implants in people that measure blood glucose, and all of that is amazing. But someone still has to come to someone with this information, with their worries about this, and talk about what next.
But is the job then, is a doctor a communicator rather than I think it used to be like, if we go hundreds of years back and you read some of, Osler's work and stuff, and you think about, I did have a romantic view that it would sort of be, I'd read some books, I sat somewhere, people came to me and they gave me eggs and I gave them with like medical wisdom.
I love that model.
But that's, I think that's right. And I think it would be really nice if we could bring that back. But I don't know, when I think about the future of work more broadly, and there's a lot of research about the attributes that are going to come to the fore, and they're all the ones that you've referenced earlier today that are called soft skills, which one of the other people that we had a conversation with earlier this season called the very hard skills.
Absolutely.
They are the very hard skills, and it is all around being an excellent communicator, understanding teamwork, self-awareness. But also that sort of adaptive problem solving, system thinking. I mean, maybe a digital intelligence that we haven't needed before in this space. Yeah. But I don't know, it feels to me like there's the possibility that a lot of what we hang our hat on as being a doctor today will just be less important. The communication for me feels like it will almost go backwards in time, and the core skill will be, how can I empathetically be in this space with you while you are vulnerable, hear your fears, and together come up with the best way we can use all the clever things that exist in the universe around us to try and walk with you through this journey. That to me is really a different description of what people maybe think they will be when we say, I want to be a doctor today.
Definitely. Yep.
I mean, I like that, but it's like Back to the Future.
Yeah, totally.
Sort of thing. And I just wonder whether technology gives us a chance to reignite the humanity in medicine.
It does, and that's the paradox, isn't it? Yeah. The technology allows us to refocus on what makes us different from a machine, I think, and that allows a conversation about humanity to unfold. The first part of your question was, is a doctor a communicator? It's always been a communicator. We just got very complicated in the last half of the last century with the explosion in biomedical understanding. But at the core of it has always been about communication. Osler knew that. The founding fathers knew that. But the role has slowly changed over time, and I think the tech allows us maybe to recalibrate that. And maybe we're being optimistic, but I think we need to be. Maybe we're being idealistic. Yeah. Maybe we need to be. But I think what happens if, I'm not saying the role won't change. It has to change. And if you look at what's happening in primary care at the moment, right, it's a very stressed system, and that what people think about it as a GP is changing whether GPs like it or not. Online prescriptions, right? Who would have thought? Yeah. I could just fill in a few things and get a prescription. I can get a medical certificate. The pharmacies have filled the gap access, means, ease, convenience. I think we need to sometimes get off our high horse about how important we are, realize that we're just part of someone's life. And if we make the experience rewarding and we keep it grounded, they will come back. They will choose us over an online prescription machine. They will choose getting the flu vax with us as opposed to going to an anonymous pharmacy, because there's much more that the doctor can bring to that encounter. But we do have to value that. And we haven't done a very good job of marketing that. And I think we've probably ignored it at the expense of all the studies that show patients care about this stuff. And we're seeing the fallout from that.
When you think about your day and the tasks that you're required to undertake, can you see an element of automation that could free you up to be the person that sits at the end of the bed for 5 minutes longer? Do you see that? And let's think about it more broadly than just doctors. I think a lot about, we work in teams. We work in multidisciplinary teams. It's a bit crazy that all of our education and everything, we're so siloed.
Exactly.
It's also a little bit crazy, I think, that doctors are assumed to be the natural leaders of the team.
Yes.
But that's probably another discussion. But when you think about a lot of the tasks that are taken, nursing staff spend so much of their time filling in OBS charts. And a lot of that, it won't be long before Easy Sense on the bed will be able to do a lot of that for us. There are parts of our task on a daily basis which can be, I think, given away to buy back that opportunity to give some meaning back into the work that we do.
Yep.
And yet we still get a lot of there's still a sort of sense of resistance to the encroaching role of technology and sort of around some of those tasks and activities. People are frightened. What does it mean if my job changes?
Yeah.
If we're going to create space, we have to give away something. I don't think it's a finite, we have a 12-hour shift and we have what we have to do. We can't to see both the patient and the doctor as humans, we have to acknowledge the space-time continuum. And I think it would be a good discussion for clinical workforce to be thinking about what are the parts of my job that I want to give away, that I want technology to take on.
Yep.
And what are the parts that I want more time to do? I mean, I just wonder some of the cynicism, some of the sadness, some of the disappointment within the profession.
The moral injury.
Yeah. I think it comes from that, the lack of power to put your time and focus in to the parts that are your passion. So, I mean, I've thought a bit about automation, and I think automation in terms of administrative tasks, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, totally.
I don't think we get much resistance for that. But when we sort of start moving into predictive outcomes and clinical decision support, it gets a little bit more grey. How do you think your colleagues are feeling about that sort of encroachment on core business for doctors?
Core doctoring.
Yeah, core doctoring.
Yeah, well, it's going to be hard if they've got an outdated view of what a doctor is, right? Which is what we've spoken about today. So if the curricula and the teaching and the training and the employment systems don't acknowledge that this change is already underway and then begin to recalibrate what doctors can expect out of their job and their relationship with patients, they will fall behind, and it won't do anything to correct the cynicism. In fact, it will feed it. It will build more resentment and foster more cynicism. I think the time thing is really interesting. You've got me thinking, we hide behind time a lot, I think, and we can use time more productively. So there's lots of research from other sectors of society that have shown how to use time properly, how to build rapport and make people feel validated and improve your communication in less time, but doing it in a more evidence-based way. The weird thing about medicine is we've ignored the evidence base in this space for so long because we're focusing on the core doctoring and we haven't yet merged those worlds. I think a lot of my colleagues are probably not thinking about this stuff because I don't know if they've got the concept, if they're even able to pull back and see the frame, because they are in the grind, they are in the system, they're experiencing the workforce tension. It would be nice if we built space into our work, acknowledging that they're people, to think about these things and not to make it a mandatory workshop and not to make it a mandatory module, which you have to quickly scroll through to get your accreditation. It would be nice if we actually embedded this stuff into the job. Automation has definitely got a role to play. What I worry though is that if we continue to focus on data as the core part of a patient, as their identity, the doctors will just spend even more time in the doctor's room looking at that data and less time collecting real data about how a person is at the bedside and what the family think about what's going on and what their understanding of what's happening to them is, or what they think is wrong, right? I mean, I was just a part of it's Patient Experience Week at the moment, and I was a part of a keynote yesterday by Dr. Rana Ordish, who was an intensivist who got very sick and ended up in intensive care. And she was frustrated repeatedly that the intensive care team focused more on the EMR part of her than her. Yeah. And the risk with data is that it gets really complicated and really detailed and really smart. And we value that even more than the organic brain telling us something about what's wrong with them.
Do you know, I was at the Cleveland Clinic. They do a patient experience
they do.
thing. It's really good.
Yeah.
But they actually have a senior clinician sit in once a year or twice a year with another senior clinician from a different discipline. Oh. And their only job is to watch how many times the senior clinician looks up from their computer to the patient in a consultation. Amazing. And feed that back.
Amazing.
Which I thought that was really good.
Isn't that cool?
So yeah, I think it's really, but it was fascinating. They then surveyed patients and talked about their experience, and it was all interrelated. But I thought that was powerful for both participants, both the observer and the person being observed, because you go away and think, is this what I'm doing as well? And they could watch the interaction as a third party, watch the patient either feel comfortable, uncomfortable, feel understood, not understood, see the doctor maybe missing a cue because they were scrolling through blood results or whatever they were doing. So it is interesting. It takes us on to a little bit, let's swing to the patient a little bit here. I used to bandy around the idea of, nothing about me without me. And, we have a lot of conversations around innovation in the hospital space, which I think everyone's getting better, but often don't include the patient in the conversation. I mean, the patient may be virtually in the room, and people might be, with the best will in the world, thinking about the patient, but we're often not involving patients and families as much as we should in thinking about innovation and changes and models of care and the like. Is that your experience as well? And as a patient advocate, how can we do that better?
Yeah, totally. I mean, co-design is, I work in mental health. We're one of the leaders in co-design, peer support, the valuation of lived experience, patient feedback. And we try our best. We aren't nailing it either, but we're certainly miles ahead of the other specialties and systems. I think that we often will throw these terms around. There's a consumer rep, or there's a patient advocate, or there's a patient liaison, but it's not truly patient oriented, because there will always be a power difference that's not acknowledged. So at the moment, I'm a consumer rep. I very rarely take consumer rep roles now, because I'm a weird consumer, if you think about it. I'm a doctor now, so my perspective is already altered. But I decided to agree to help this large organisation review some national guidelines. And the first meeting, there were 2 consumer reps and about 25 professorial academics debating this stuff. And we weren't asked what we thought. But even if I were asked, I'm not going to say anything, not in that room. Yeah. I think, there's some basic stuff that we miss with including patients in design and actual consultation, and we forget the privilege and power that exists within us and how that might be alienating to patients, even when they're in the room, actually empowering them to have a voice. So I don't think we do this well. I think there's a lot of marketing about it, and I'm a bit cynical in the book about that. There's lots of marketing about it, but when it comes down to it, it's often quite hard to actually deliver fully patient-centered care, because sometimes it means doing things that the system doesn't approve of.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about technology is, at the end of the day, the patient will decide what they accept and what they don't accept. So I find in the health system, we don't engage. Patients could be a extremely powerful group for change in health, and harnessing the wisdom of the group, the needs of that group. That could, I don't know, just shortcut so many of the battles that we're sort of fighting behind the scenes, nominally on patients' behalfs.
I agree.
But I often sort of chuckle when I think about technology, because if we have in radiology, if we have an X-ray artificial intelligence reader thing that is going to give you results, but you choose exclusively to attend the person, the radiologist, and that's happening time and time again when people are given the options. It's not like technology is going to have its way. And so I think so much of this conversation, we're battling to create innovation for a group of people without asking the people what battles they'd like us to be putting our attention to.
Absolutely. And isn't that weird? When you think, when you pull back, this is a service that doesn't really ask what service the person wants.
That's right.
Right? We design a service for someone, and then that's the service. Take it or leave it. If you like it, it's fine. If you don't like it, discharge against medical advice, right? Dharma, a phrase I never use. I just think it's absurd that has occurred. And I think part of that is because it's not like ordering food through my phone. I'm sick. So it's going to be different. And we almost have to compensate for that. We have to go above and beyond the 5-star rating, right? Because we're dealing with a cohort that is ill and worried and anxious. And even if it's about a routine scan, or even if it's about a low iron count, there will always be elements of emotion in that. And we just haven't asked them what they want. And then going back to my example before, when you do put alternative products out there, like the pharmacies can provide certain things. Now they can prescribe antibiotics for UTI, and you can get your prescription online. They will go to it. That's a signal. That's a signal that the current offering isn't up to scratch.
I want to talk a little bit about the pressures on junior doctors. We read a lot. We've all seen what's going on in the NHS. This is a worldwide phenomenon of exhaustion, of burnout, of lack of purpose, all these pieces. There was a Black Dog Institute paper which came out looking at, again, the future of sort of the healthy workplace. And it talked a bit about autonomy being critical, improved job control being critical, flexible work being critical, and these are all words that there's a real tension with the sort of the role of the junior doctor. We've talked a little bit about dreams for the future, but right now, what can we be doing to be sort of continuing to challenge or channel the talent and passion that people enter medicine with? How can we make sure that we keep that passion alive?
Big one.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. We're getting towards the end.
It's a good one, though. I think in terms of fostering and retaining people as service providers, as talent, I don't know if we do a very good job at actually employing them as people, which gets back to our other our earlier points. We forget that there's a lot of other things happening. Like my toddler was sick, and as a doctor in the relationship, it's often, my job's more important, so I can go to work and my wife will try and accommodate. But this particular, she had a project due and I had to take the day off. And I took fax leave, but I had to sign a stat dec to say that my toddler had a fever and needed to remain at home. The burden, the administrative burden on us is not just within the job, it's the job itself, it's reporting up. It's hard to generalise, but at the moment my boss has had to go overseas for emergency fax leave, and I haven't heard from anyone in the hospital. Do you have appropriate cover? What's happening with governance? Who's supervising you?
Are you okay with their absence? Are you coping? It's almost like, again, we're autonomous units in a machine, and unless I complain or I burn out, no one will notice what's going on for us. I think, we talk a lot about technology, but there's some low-hanging fruit in our human relations system, our human resources system, where we could really just start to think about doctors as human beings and other clinicians as human beings in a system, and adopt some of the stuff from other sectors, for example, the corporate sector, which won't cost more money. It will actually save money, right? This stuff saves money, but there's just this aversion to, modernizing.
I think where we've come to in the conversation is that there are elements of being a doctor that are essentially human and will remain ring-fenced. And we've sort of skirted around this idea that maybe there is a role for technology to give us the opportunity to refocus on that human connection. And maybe, the future of work for doctors is to consider human connection the work. Does that future resonate for you?
Oh yeah, 100%. That's why I'm still here. So I'm still in the game, right? And I came here to give back and to chip away at system change, and I'm as motivated as I was then because I do have hope, and I see lots of change. I see lots of small scale stuff. I see lots of people working on projects and chipping away at patient focused incentives. I see people really caring all the time, every day. So, a lot of the stuff I can talk about seems like doom and gloom and that the system's broken. It's just in need of repair, and the repair is being done, right? And at the same time, it needs to be done alongside the stuff you've talked about today, the technological tsunami, the challenges to future work. But, we've got to start that work, and we've got to make the base strong to even begin to have the conversations that you want to have about where tech takes us. Because if we just put it on top of the system it is, a little bit, if we can draw an analogy, what the pandemic did, right? The pandemic just put this huge new thing on top of an already fractious thing. And that's why we've, got anecdotal quotes of an exodus, and we've got record burnout, and we've got record patient dissatisfaction at the same time. If we just take tech and all the future stresses and put it on top of that system without addressing its core problems, disaster.
Dr. Ben Bravery, I'm really keen to watch your future in the healthcare system, and we wish you all the best with driving the sorts of change that we've talked about here today. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Go ahead and like, share, or subscribe now so you don't miss a thing.